I'm just hearing now that the accused shooter, Nicholas Cruz, used an AR-15 rifle to shoot 17 people dead today with multiple magazines. This is at a high school where students were trying to go and spend their Valentine's Day and learn and be in the peace of their classroom at school. A lot of legal questions being raised about this shooting. We have our legal expert, David Weinstein, on the phone for us. So David, can you hear us? Are you there?
I'm here. I hear you both.
So I read some of your notes earlier today. You were mentioning that there are not federal school shooting laws on the books. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Unlike the situation at the airport, where there's a specific federal statute that covers a shooting that might occur at an airport, they do have gun-free school zone laws, but the impact of that is that it simply puts a punishment in place for having or discharging a gun on a school campus, but carries a maximum penalty of only 5 years.
Okay, so as opposed to the airport case at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, where there was another mass shooting not too long ago, the legal status would be different. The charges would be different here, assuming both shooters were adults.
Correct, and again, that's right. The age comes into play here. I've been hearing reports that he's at least 18 years of age, which would make him no longer a juvenile in either the Florida state system or the federal system. So he would be subject to adult penalties for the crime that he's committed. The other thing to consider is, in order to stretch this into a federal prosecution, they'd have to establish some sort of an effect on interstate commerce in order to call this a crime where he used a weapon of mass destruction to kill these people, similar to the situation in Boston and the marathon, or even in the case with Dylan Roof. But there, his was based on a hate crime occurring at the church.
David, take us through the next several hours for this suspect who is now being questioned in police custody. Talk to us about the legal process that awaits him, possible arraignment. When are we going to see him? When will he be given access to an attorney? How does all of that work?
Well, since he's in custody, they're obligated to inform him of the right he has against self-incrimination, that he has a right to a lawyer. He can't afford a lawyer. One will be appointed to him. And then it's up to him to decide whether or not he wants to talk to the officers and give them a voluntary statement, whether he wants to invoke his right to remain silent, whether he wants an attorney. Once he's invoked his right to remain silent or has asked to speak to an attorney, they can't question him anymore. So they're at this point trying to find out whether or not he will talk to them, whether or not there are any other people involved in this situation, whether there's any other danger that's still out there, whether he was acting on his own, whether there's anything else that anybody needs to be worried about. Getting past all that, his arraignment will appear, his initial appearance will appear in all likelihood tomorrow morning in Broward County State Court. Even if this were a federal case, it's going to take a little bit more work before they're going to go forward with a federal prosecution. So they would, in all likelihood, bring him before an initial appearance judge in Broward tomorrow morning.
David, I'm curious to talk about the weapon a little bit. If we're hearing reports, we've gotten information in that this was multiple magazines, an AR-15 that killed 17 people. Can you talk a little bit about that and what investigators might be looking into in terms of whether he acquired it, where he acquired it, and when, and whether his background, if he had a criminal background, whether that played into the charges he might face?
Well, certainly. He could have purchased this weapon at any firearms dealer, provided he submitted to a background check, and he either wasn't a convicted felon or wasn't here as a non-resident alien. He'd also have to indicate to them that he wasn't using any drugs, that he was mentally stable. And once he cleared that background check, he could have purchased the rifle and as much ammunition as he needed. One of the things about the AR-15 is that it's all made here in the U.S. So it's not like we're dealing with a firearm where there are elements of it imported from outside the U.S. Depending upon where it was manufactured, it may or may not touch, again, on interstate commerce.
So he could have been considered mentally stable enough to buy an AR-15, even though he'd been reportedly kicked out of the school and not allowed back in and not allowed to bring a backpack.
Yes, because there's a difference between exhibiting behavior that's not appropriate for school officials versus a healthcare professional who's going to make a finding as to his mental capacity.
David, I have to ask you, even though he is technically an adult, he's a new adult if he's only 18 years old, and I'm just wondering about the culpability from a legal standpoint of his parents. If we find out, for example, and we don't know at this point, there's a lot we don't know at this point, but if we find out he was living at home, if we find out that these weapons belonged to his parents and that those weapons were available to him or were not stored properly, and he was able to gain access to them that way, do his parents potentially face any legal problems, or are they in the clear because he is an adult? Without
knowing all the facts, Rick, it would depend again on whose firearms they are, who owned them, where they were kept, who possessed them, how he got access to them, when they were purchased, when exactly he turned 18, when he took possession of the guns, whether somebody had seen them with him before. I think there's certainly a lot of questions that investigators are going to want to ask his parents as well.
And the school. I mean, if we hear, and we've heard the stories from other students that this was someone who was known to be a problem while he was there at the school. What are the legal requirements of school officials when they come across a student like this, who they consider to be, potentially dangerous? Are there legal requirements for exactly who they have to report that information to?
Well, again, only knowing the facts that I've been hearing that have been reported, it sounds like they did what was within their responsibility with regards to his behavior, notifying the school district what was going on, and then because of the confidentiality of school records, we may not be able to get access to exactly who it was they also notified as to what their findings were and whether or not that made its way into any mental health professional's records.
Because you know that parents are going to hear that this was someone who was on the radar of at least some school officials, and that for whatever reason he was able to gain access to the building today. There are going to be an awful lot of people in Parkland and all over the country who are going to be upset that perhaps somebody dropped the ball.
I don't know if it's as much as somebody dropping the ball, but we all sort of have to put this in perspective. This is a horrible, tragic event, and quite frankly, without putting a fence around a school, without putting metal detectors at every point of entry at a school, and essentially imprisoning all these students who are just simply going to school to learn every day, it becomes nearly impossible to completely ensure that the campus was sealed off. Again, based on what I'm hearing, it appears that they've done what they needed to do, and this was simply an individual who found a way to get around the system that was in place and to carry out his terrible plan.
So, David, this is one of many mass shootings we've reported even here locally in Florida. Are there any similarities or differences that strike you with other recent mass shootings?
Unfortunately, it's all too similar to the situations that we've seen both in Las Vegas, although that wasn't on a school campus, with Dylan Roof in earlier, last couple of years. That one was at a church, and even going back to Columbine, as far as the first one that we all seem to remember. It all centers around an unstable individual who's come back to exact revenge. Quite frankly, no different than the stories that we hear all the time of former employees who are going back to places that discharge them.
And David, quickly, before we let you go, is there any way terrorism charges could play into this investigation?
We all bandy about the word terrorism, and we use it to sort of shoehorn in everything that's going on here. I don't think that he targeted any of these students in furtherance of any sort of terrorist organization, although if there is some statement he's made on social media, if there's some sort of statement he makes while he's speaking to the police officers, if he was doing this on behalf of some terrorist organization, that's perhaps one way for them to call this a terrorist attack. Bottom line, it's a horrible tragedy, a senseless shooting and killing that took place on a campus where young people are supposed to learn. that in and of itself may not qualify as the black letter definition of terrorism, but it was a terroristic type of act that he carried out today.
All right, David Weinstein, thank you very much for joining us today and answering our legal questions about this unfolding case.